back to your wedding. It was a great time, wasn't it? Husbands, shake your heads, yes. In most cases, it involved months of anticipation and preparation. You knew the day was coming, so you tried to get everything planned almost down to the minute, with little to no room for delay. So much thought goes into every single detail. You probably dated your spouse for a few years. Maybe you were even high school sweethearts. Maybe you had a brief courtship. But of all the fish in the sea, you chose to be with each other. Well, in the Jewish culture, things were quite a bit different. The whole idea of eyes meeting across the room, of flirting, and dating, and falling in love, leading up to marriage, was not the normal way of doing things. Two families with kids of similar age, and sometimes not so similar, would come to an arrangement while the kids were still very young. The reason for the pairing could be driven by wealth, status, or simply because they knew early on the other side wouldn't be too bad to have his in-laws. The boy would learn a trade, usually from his father, and the young lady would have been learning how to care for a household and children during this same time. The boy would apprentice and work his way up until he could make a living on his own, sometimes generally around his 20s, sometimes a little later, sometimes a little earlier. But at that point, he would begin to build his own house. He was making his own living. The girl would have been preparing for her wedding during this time as well, making her own wedding dress while watching the progress of the house from afar. When the house was complete, the young man and his friends would go and get the bride. This was a big to-do. The man would bring his bride back to his family's house, and they would have a wedding ceremony and a massive party. Everyone in the town that they even remotely knew would have been invited. Now, part of this party would have been the entertainment of dancers, and that is where the 10 virgins or the 10 bridesmaids that we heard in the parable come to the picture. It said that they would have a lamp or a torch, and they would dance until the flame was extinguished, until it burned out. Now, today's parable is known as the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, or the 10 virgins. And in this parable, there is a wedding about to take place. And when the day has arrived, 10 bridesmaids go to meet the bridegroom. The house is complete, and the bridegroom is ready to go and get his wife. 5 of them only brought the minimum amount of oil needed for their lamps, and 5 brought extra, just in case. Now, it turns out that the bridegroom was delayed, so they all slept. All 10 of them. That's not their fault. They all slept. When his arrival was announced at midnight, the 5 who didn't have enough oil realized their mistake and tried to borrow from the 5 who brought extra. They said, "No, go into your town, buy your own." And in attempting to do so, the foolish bridesmaids missed the bridegroom's arrival. Now, the 5 who were prepared went with him to the marriage feast where they locked the doors. The 5 who weren't ready and were off buying their own oil returned and found not only the doors locked, but after calling out, found themselves denied entry into the party at all. Now, there are different theories as to who the 10 bridesmaids represent, and for a seminary class, it would be really fun to dive into these 13 verses and make some charts and outlines and put an insomniac to sleep. Thanks be to God, I'm not going to do that today. But while those different interpretations are debated, there are 3 things in this parable that are not debated. A, Jesus is the bridegroom. Whenever the bridegroom is mentioned, almost always that's Jesus in the parable. The church is the bride, not the bridesmaids. But the bride, even though she is mentioned in this parable, there has to be one for there to be a marriage feast, a bridegroom, and bridesmaids. You have to have a bride to have those. See, the third thing that is near universally accepted is that the main point of the story is that this is being prepared for the day of judgment. Now, in my New Testament class, the professor warned us against assigning too much meaning to parables. If you dissect a parable far enough to where every single word and every single line has a distinct and exact meaning or representation, you've missed the point, and you're dangerously close to where you can't see the forest for the trees. John Piper says this about parables in general, and this parable in particular. Here's a good principle to learn about parables. Beware of letting imaginary details of parables, and that's what parables are, they're imaginary, contradict the clear teaching of Jesus elsewhere. Parables are not that sort of teaching. They are verbal pictures to make a point, but not every brushstroke in the picture is assigned or designed to make a separate point. So you see, the parables are not necessarily meant to be taken literally word for word, nor are they concealing or veiling something in each and every word. They're stories, explanations, and examples. Now, this point in my sermon, where my learning to take hold of me, and I could fall prey to wanting to show off and use big fancy words, and throw around names of guys that wore tweed and smoked pipes and just had oak-lined walls in their studies. But the truth of the matter is this: Jesus is coming again. It's not my job to wow you with skilled oratory. It's not my job to coddle you into living a life of lackluster faith. It's my calling to tell you that Jesus is coming again, and you better be ready. You see, the foolish bridesmaids weren't prepared for the delay of the bridegroom. They didn't plan the long haul. I'm guilty of that. Back in the mid and late 80s, there was a movie about the rapture. I can't think of the name of it. I tried to think of it. I Googled it. Some of you may know exactly which one it is. But it probably wasn't meant to be watched by an 8-year-old. I guarantee you that. My dad was a youth minister at a church, Bethany Baptist Church in Baldwin, Tennessee. And I was with him, and he was showing this movie to the youth group. Now, knowing my dad, I'm pretty sure that I was not supposed to be watching this movie with the youth group. Probably upstairs. To date myself, that's when the first Nintendo came out, and there was one up in the meeting room. I was probably supposed to be playing with that, but I watched this movie. It literally scared the devil out of me. When we got home, I prayed for my parents. And I think I had my skinny rear end up to the altar the very next Sunday, ready to be dumped, sprinkled, squirted with a fire hose, whatever it took to keep me from being scarred. I was ready for it. I did not want that. But I didn't plan for the long haul. To be honest, each day after that, I wasn't looking to further my relationship with Christ. I was just happy that fire and brimstone didn't rain down from the sky and nobody was tooting on any trumpets. I didn't bring enough oil. I wasn't ready for the delay. Now, thankfully, I was raised by parents who were wonderful models of Christian living, and in my senior year of high school, I began to get serious about my faith. I began to read the Bible that for years I said I believed, but from only which I knew a handful of verses. I began to expand my prayers from one or two half-hearted sentences muttered into the dark into words spoken in faith, real conversations from my lips to God's ears. I began to gather extra oil for the delay. But thankfully, I learned that in time. I learned in time that we not only need to be ready for the return of Christ, but we need to be diligent in preparation for the return of Christ. Now, I want to ask you, how much oil do you have? And that's not a question I want you to blow off. That's not just a filler in the sun. I have some more tough questions for you. And I truly want you to know that I ask these questions to myself as well. I struggle with this sermon like no other. Are you like the foolish bridesmaids who only brought the bare minimum of oil? Or to put it more frankly, in what are you investing your time, your energy, your faith, and your family? Are you preparing during the delay? Or are you flaunting the delay? For you and your family, are you investing in a firm foundation of faith, whose cornerstone is Christ himself? Or are you hoping to get by on claiming to be a Christian because you got baptized and you baptized your children, and that's the beginning and end of your lifelong story of faith? Are you teaching your children to pray and to know God in all of his fullness and mercy and grace, or are you perfecting their golf swing, their soccer kick, or pitching arm while sacrificing them on the altar of possible college scholarships? Are you investing more time in prayer for your children's physical talents or for their spiritual health? Are you praying for your marriage? Are you investing in your own faith by reading the very words of God and regularly receiving the very body and blood of Christ himself in the sacrament of the Mass? Or are you telling yourself that there will always be more time later? Maybe after the next promotion. Maybe after you have kids. Maybe even when the kids move out and you aren't so busy. Maybe then you think, that's not a serious thing. It's easy, so easy, to get caught up in what the world tells us we need. It's easy to try to keep up with our friends, to compare our children, our spouses, our careers, our marriages, our hobbies, our houses to theirs. But our hope doesn't lie in the things of this world. The time we are given isn't for leisure, for self-promotion, or self-worship. Our hope in believers in Jesus Christ lies only in him, and in him crucified and risen, as he has told us that he will come again. Our time is limited. Whether it be by natural death or by the second coming, our time on this earth is limited. There will be a day of judgment, and you better be ready. Now, this is not my most eloquent sermon by far. I'm shaking a little bit doing it, but this is probably one of the most heartfelt sermons I've ever preached in 4 years. The late J.I. Packer said that the preacher's job is to proclaim faith, not to provide entertainment for unbelievers. In other words, to feed the sheep rather than amuse the goats. I'm begging you to take a closer look at your life, your faith, and in whom or what or where lies your hope. Because if your hope and your faith is not in the firm foundation of Jesus Christ, you will fail, and you will be locked out of the way of faith. Now, if you truly believe that you're stuck in a life of despair, it's 2020 after all, that's most of us. 2 Corinthians 12:9 tells us that my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. There is always hope in Jesus. If you're living a life of sin, no matter the sin, and acknowledge that you need a Savior, it's not too late to turn to Jesus Christ and to receive the free gift of grace that he offers every single one of us. His grace is sufficient for you. If you've been raised in church and simply show up frequently or infrequently, out of habit, go through emotions, and are weary without faith, don't give up. Turn to Christ before it's too late. His grace is sufficient for you. Matthew 11:28-30 tells us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now I truly hope and pray that you take all these questions to heart and say, yes, I am ready to stand on the judgment day, strong in faith, and hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." If you engage those questions, however, and wrestle with them, and realize that while you do believe, you're not living a life of faith, and you're not seeking Jesus, or you feel that you can flat out say no to those questions that I ask, you're not ready. And Father Chris and I are ready to talk with you and pray with you after the service. But I tell you again, the bridegroom is coming. The day of judgment is coming. I don't know when, but it is coming. Are you ready to say, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. And now the prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of his return. And the prize is not just for me,